So, the translations are out for My Hero Academia, manga chapter 337 officially, and in this video, I'm going to talk about a few differences between the official and unofficial translations that really give light to Aoyama and his family and the reasonings why they did what they did, as well as address the idea of whether or not Aoyama can, or if he should, be redeemed. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but first, right after this. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew, and I'm here to do my discussion on My Hero Academia, manga chapter 337, titled A Disposable Life. And when it comes to this video and when it comes to this discussion, like I said earlier, what we're going to be discussing in this video are some major differences between the official and unofficial translation that gives a little bit more light to why Aoyama and his family did what they did, as well as dive into the issue of Aoyama being the UA traitor and whether or not he can be redeemed later on in the story, and if in this chapter he has been redeemed. So, before we get right into the comparisons between the official and unofficial translations, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't done so, to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I cover My Hero Academia content, the spoilers, I do reviews, as well as do discussions just like this when the chapters come out. So if that's something that you're interested in and you just stumbled upon my video by chance, why not hit that subscribe button so that you can see more content like this? And with that out the way, let's go right into the differences between the official and unofficial translations. So when it comes to the official and unofficial translations, there are some differences between them this chapter. A lot of it comes from more clarity, as well as giving a little bit more emphasis on the family aspect of Aoyama, and it kind of shifts why they did what they did between the official and unofficial translations. For instance, in the unofficial translation, there is a heavy focus on the idea that Aoyama's parents were so focused and cared so much about Aoyama for being different that that's the reasoning why they did the things that they did. But in the official translation, it seems to be a little bit more selfish on the parents' part. Now, don't get me wrong, they aren't being selfish, but from what we see with the official translation, it's less that they were concerned all about Aoyama being different, but more about the fact that they are parents with a child that is different. So that is a slight difference between the official and unofficial translation, but another difference in the same vein is that in the unofficial translation, Aoyama says that their compassion and their sympathy was what fueled his dream to be a hero. But in the official translation, it is more stated that his dream became his dream, which is to be a hero, because of his parents' desire to conform, because of his parents' desire for him not to be different, and how that desire may come from a little bit more of a selfish place. So yeah, it's still a little bit more ambiguous in the official translation of whether or not the parents are objectively good and what they did was objectively right. While in the unofficial translation, it's shown that what they did was the right decision. So, another difference in this chapter, and it's not that minor, comes from the moment where, spoiler alert, Hagekure's face gets revealed, and most likely from what we're seeing, it is not necessarily a reveal within the story, but more of a reveal to the readers, because it seems as if no other characters are seeing her face, but we still cannot say that for certain. And when it comes to the differences between the official and unofficial translations, it pretty much comes from how she says what she said. Because between the official and unofficial translation, Hagekure pretty much says that this whole time, or while Aoyama was at school and how they lived under the same roof, that he was being a traitor. That is the gist of what she is saying in both the official and unofficial translations, but the difference comes from that in the unofficial translation, she is saying these as statements and not questions, while in the official translation, she's saying these as questions and not statements. And I think that it is more impactful in the official translation, mainly for the idea that she's asking questions about why Aoyama was the UA traitor instead of just specifically stating that he was and stating what he did. She wanted Aoyama to say the reasonings why he did that, which leads on later into the chapter where he kind of gives her an answer based off the question that she asked here. So if anything, it just makes the story in this chapter flow a little bit better in the official translation than in the unofficial translation. And once again, another difference which comes more from how the panels are structured between the official and unofficial translation comes from when we see the students in class 1A come to the realization or are told that Aoyama is the UA traitor. Because in the unofficial translations, you have Shoto saying that there is no way ... and then that statement being finished by Kaminari saying we are staying away from this. But in the official translation, it is seen as two different dialogues where you have Shoto saying that there's no way that they're leaving, and then you have Kaminari saying that this doesn't make any sense. So it's a slight difference when it comes to who is actually saying what, and it's not something to really talk a lot about. But something major that we could talk about involves Aoyama's father and his explanation to Sakachi about how they were interacting with All For One and how their partnership, quote unquote, worked. Because in the unofficial translation, you have the father of Aoyama saying that All For One showed them examples and gave this explanation that if they had gone to the police, that they would be killed as soon as they left the building and that they had no choice but to follow him. But in the official translations, what he says is that he gave them a demonstration of those who defy him, and then you have All For One explaining that this person that he killed in front of them was a lackey that pretty much snitched on him to the police, and that he was brought and captured as soon as he escaped prison, and then was killed in front of Aoyama's father and potentially Aoyama's mother. And this is very important, and this is a very distinct change and very impactful because it kind of gives them a better reason to stay with All For One. Because you could say that, oh, they should have gone to the police and that it would have been over there, but based off the unofficial translation, it would make sense because they could have had All For One captured, and even if All For One was in jail, he may not have been able to do anything for them and cause them harm if they told the police in the unofficial translation. But in the official translation, as we see, it's a little bit more impactful because he shows them literally what would happen by killing someone in front of them. And this causes them most likely to be more fearful of All For One and make it less likely that they would go to the police because they would be filled with the fear of what All For One would literally do because he literally did it in front of them. So if anything, they're more fearful in the official translation, which makes more sense for them not to go to the police because they truly feared death because they saw what All For One would do to them. So the final difference between the official and unofficial translation comes from Deku's final speech, specifically when he brings up Lady Nagin and brings up the idea of what happens to villains who commit a single crime. Because in the unofficial translations, you have him talking about a certain hero, aka Lady Nagant, and how she was controlled by All For One, and how she would never give up, and that her mind was completely crushed, but not her spirit. And how he begins to go on to say that no one should be named a villain for the rest of their lives just because they committed a crime. And that last bit of dialogue really threw the fandom into a tizzy because people were thinking about like, oh, well then if that's the case, then if someone does X, Y, and Z, then Deku would automatically forgive them then and they shouldn't be considered a criminal or a villain, and like listing like multiple murders, like potentially raping someone. And I think that a lot of people are taking that too much to heart, and we get it to be said a little bit better in the official translation. Because in the official translations, you have him once again talk about Lady Nagin and how she was manipulated by All For One, but that she didn't sell her whole soul. And how even though her spirit was crushed, she still had the essence of a hero inside of her. This, in the official translation, at the very least, directly contradicts what we see in the unofficial translation, and it sort of kind of makes sense for what Lady Nagin did. She didn't really trust All For One, that her spirit was crushed, but she still had the essence of a hero inside of her, as seen with the example that Deku gave in that fight, that she could have hit him with the bullet at first shot, but gave him a warning shot, showing that she still wasn't completely broken. So that is one difference, but another difference comes from what Deku says in the official translations about how when it comes to being a villain, how doing wrong doesn't make you a villain for the rest of your life. And I think this makes a little bit more sense for the context of what Deku is saying and just more general and realistic to life, because it kind of boils down to the idea that you may do something wrong and you may commit a crime, but that it shouldn't follow you for the rest of your life, with a caveat on it, if you are willing to change. And I think that is what Deku is trying to imply with that line in the official translation, that you shouldn't let one wrong deed follow you for the rest of your life if you are trying to fix and become a better person afterwards. And I think this begins to tie into the idea of whether or not Aoyama was redeemed in this chapter, which we're going to get into right now. So let's talk about that. Is Aoyama redeemed in this chapter? And from what I've seen in this chapter, at least from Deku, yes. But here's the thing that you have to realize. Just because he may be redeemed by Deku, A, doesn't mean that he's been redeemed by everyone else in Class 1A. B, doesn't mean that he himself has been redeemed by his own merit. And C, it doesn't mean that he has been forgiven by anyone. And to explain, being redeemed is not the same as being forgiven. Being redeemed has many different levels of meaning to it, which include compensating for the faults of bad aspects of yourself, atoning or making amends for sins and evils you have done, and to save from sins, errors, or evils. And with those definitions in mind, in this chapter, we see Deku redeeming Aoyama by trying to save him from his errors that he has committed. But even though Deku is doing that, he still hasn't technically redeemed Aoyama when it comes to atonement or compensating for his faults. And those are things that Aoyama would have to do. And I think this is going to tie into what Aoyama is going to be doing for the rest of this story and potentially next chapter. We are most likely going to see Aoyama begin to redeem himself. And that redemption is most likely going to come from the idea that he's sort of going to be a double agent for the heroes. Because as we saw in this chapter and what we also saw in last chapter, that when it comes to the heroes, they won't be able to have an advantage on the villains because the villains will be the one most likely to make the first strike. But as we saw in this chapter with the quote that if nothing else, we can choose how to enter the fight, Aoyama is most likely going to play a role in how they enter the fight by being a double agent and allowing for the heroes most likely to get a jump on the villains. So when it comes to redemption, he is technically going to be saved by the fact that he's no longer going to be a traitor for All for One, but be a double agent for the heroes. So that's where his redemption is going to come in, from the fact that he is saved by Deku in this moment. But most likely the second and third levels of redemption that he will get will be atonement for what he did. And the best way for him to atone or compensate for his bad deeds is to be a hero, to be that double agent and potentially risk his life to save others and save civilians. And the reasoning why I'm bringing this up is because what Aoyama is going to go through is probably going to be very similar to what we've seen Endeavor gone through. And this ties into the idea that atonement as well as redemption is not the same as forgiveness. Because to be forgiven or to forgive means to stop feeling angry or residual feelings for someone due to an offense, a flaw, or a mistake. Which means that you can be redeemed and not be forgiven, or that you can be redeemed and that redemption can lead to forgiveness. And tying it into the case with Endeavor, we've seen that Endeavor is trying to redeem himself, trying to atone for what he has done, and we've seen that with him trying to connect with his family, apologizing for everything that he has done to them, as well as trying to separate himself from them so that they can live a happy life, so that he can live in solitude and atone, and also to take down Toya, aka Dabi, as seen as a mistake that he caused to fix all of his wrongdoings. So Endeavor is trying to atone or make amends for what he has done, but as we've seen with the character of Natsuo, he still may not forgive him. And that is a point that was made within the story, that he is not looking for forgiveness, but atonement coming from Endeavor. Endeavor is not looking to be forgiven by his family or the people that he wronged, but he's only seeking atonement for himself to show that he has changed and that he wants to fix what he has broken. So I think Aoyama could go through a similar stage where he may also want to atone and not necessarily seek forgiveness, which could lead to him sacrificing his life and then eventually being forgiven, or that he does so much to atone for what he did that other characters may forgive him. Because we have to look at the characters that are most likely going to forgive him, which are going to be the characters such as All Might, the teachers, but more importantly, the students of Class 1A. Because we have at least two characters that we saw in this chapter that may not necessarily forgive him immediately, and those characters are Hagakure and Ojiro. Hagakure for her asking the questions of how Aoyama could pretty much stay as he was, pretending to be happy while stabbing everyone in the back by being a traitor to All For One. That questioning of him may mean that she may not forgive him. And that same questioning we saw also with Ojiro, saying that what would have happened if Hagakure had not have caught him, as well as we see the expression on his face, could imply that he also may not forgive Aoyama. But just because Aoyama doesn't be forgiven doesn't mean that he won't redeem and atone for his actions through being a hero and potentially sacrificing his life. So what would he need to do as pretty much a double agent or a spy for the heroes to help him redeem his actions as being the UA traitor? Most likely, he's going to begin to feed false information to All For One, which would give All For One like a plan that he's going to set in place, and then that plan is most likely going to fall apart, and that he won't have any secondary or tertiary plans around it because all the information that he had to make that plan was false, which will allow the heroes to be able to, as Deku said, enter the fight on their own choice. Now, it may not lead to All For One's immediate defeat, but it will most likely throw him off balance, which would give them a fighting chance to actually defeat him. So I think that is going to be the way that Aoyama is going to redeem himself and to be fully redeemed in the eyes of all of the heroes, all of the characters in the story, of himself, and potentially of the readers as well. So yeah, that's pretty much all of my thoughts on Aoyama when it comes to whether or not he can or has been redeemed. I do believe he has been redeemed in one aspect through Deku saving him in a way from no longer being a traitor to the heroes, but that he will most likely get more redemption and potentially atonement for what he has done, which could lead to him once again following a similar path to Endeavor, which could lead to his death, which could mean that he could be the only student that dies, and through that he could gain forgiveness from all of the other characters in the story. So yeah, that's all I really want to talk about when it comes to Aoyama. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. So let me just ask you this. What do you think of Aoyama and his redemption? Do you think that he was redeemed? Do you think that he wasn't redeemed? Do you think that he actually can't be redeemed? Or do you think that he's going to be redeemed later on in the future? Leave your thoughts down in the comments down below. Leave a like on the video if you liked it. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you like this type of content. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to be notified for whenever I upload more content like this. Do all that cool jazz. And hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!